Well, it's back to school time and I'm ready to learn from the Collage quilter.
Justin, it's the Collage quilter.
She says tomato, I say tomato. Let's just call the whole thing off. No, stick around everyone. We've got a wonderful show. Wait till you see these quilts. And now, your hosts for the Quilt Show, Alex Anderson and Ricky Timms.
Welcome to the Quilt Show, everyone. I'm solo hosting right now, and I wonder what Alex might be doing. I mean, she could be quilting, and she could be cooking, and she might be knitting, although probably not very well. Or she might just be playing with her cat, Sparrow. But nonetheless, we're going to miss Alex today on the Quilt Show. But what we're not going to miss is our special guest of the day. Please welcome to the Quilt Show, Emily Taylor. Emily, come on out. I'm very excited to have you here today.
I am so excited to be here too. Thank you for having me.
Have a seat. So here's the thing. First of all, I didn't know you till today, right?
Right.
But oh my gosh, what I have got to learn about you before I met you has got me so excited.
Thank you.
You're officially known right now as the Collage quilter, right?
Yes.
And so your quilts are based in Collage, and we're going to get to know a lot about you, but I thought maybe we would start by just showing everybody a couple of your quilts, and then we'll have a chat, okay?
Sounds great.
All right, so let's talk about the first quilt.
Okay, so this quilt, I just created this actually a few months ago. This was a lot of fun for me because I love florals, I love springtime. But I've struggled because I want to make a beautiful floral quilt. And I actually ripped this apart a couple times and then redid it. But I'm pretty happy with the way it turned out.
I like it. It's absolutely a very, very happy quilt.
Thank you.
Now, your fabric choices, you're using mostly commercial fabrics, right?
Yep.
All right. And then kind of layering them in ways that we're going to learn today. So it is a collage effect.
Yep.
I think it's fabulous. All right, now the next one, not botanical at all. It's a lovely, intimate quilt. Tell us about this.
Thank you. This one is called Adoration. This is inspired by the Gustav Klimt painting called Mother and Child.
Right.
Gustav Klimt is not only one of my favorite artists, but the subject and the portrayal of this affectionate scene just strikes a chord with me because I'm a mom and this is how I feel about my children.
Right. And I know the painting that you're talking about.
Yeah, it's beautiful, right?
It is. It really is. Very affectionate painting. So tell me about collage. Just tell me what it is for you as a quilter. How does it work in your spirit?
Yeah, so I love, like any quilter, I love textiles. I love the fabric, the interplay of patterns and color and repeat. And I want to use as much of it as I possibly can, and collage quilting allows me to do that. So I can just use a ton of fabric, just a snippet of a little bit of everything. And it's just a fun, creative medium for expressing myself.
And quilting was not your first artistic endeavor. As a matter of fact, everybody, you're going to look at some pictures right now that Emily has done. I knocked my socks off. These are paintings, murals, watercolors. Tell us a little bit about these.
So I was a mural artist before I had kids, and when I was expecting my first child, I did that one that you saw with the nursery rhymes, and this is how I made money. And I actually started by knocking door to door on homes. In upscale neighborhoods looking for people to hire me, and eventually that's how I built my little business.
And murals like on bedroom walls or things like that.
Yeah, kind of crazy, huh?
And then a lot of them are many of them paintings as well? You also do paintings that are framed?
Yeah, so you saw the one with my grandpa. My grandpa was an artist and he was a guitar player, and so that was a tribute to him. I painted that several years ago and gave that to him for Christmas. And then this one, for instance, is, I mentioned I'm a mom, I have 3 kids, and during the time that I was home with my kids, I painted illustrations of everyday domestic life, and they were kind of tongue-in-cheek, kind of just fun illustrations about motherhood.
They're beautifully done, really,
you.
truly. And so many quilters, I will say this, I mean, most quilters don't come from an art background. Most quilters come from a sewing background, or they start putting pieces together,
Right.
but you're coming to it from an artist background. And if we look at the next quilt, which is a beautiful bouquet, tell us about this because it's very painterly.
Oh, thank you. That's such a nice way to describe it. I appreciate that. I love this one. This, again, I was on a quest to create some beautiful flowers in fabric. And this one, I think I nailed it, finally. So this is called May Day. I did this in May. It was a quarantine quilt.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, I'm really excited about how this one turned out.
I'm excited about seeing it. And just because, we're looking at it on screen, clarify, is there any painting in this, or is it all fabric?
It's all fabric. And you can see as you get closer that it's just small pieces of fabric that are all pretty much smaller than the palm of my hand applied to a foundation to create the values and the dimension in the quilt.
Yeah, and everybody, that's what we're going to be learning today. So you're going to get to do this. All right, the next one looks to me like an orange tree, but I'm not sure if I've got it right.
Yeah, I call this my Clementine topiary.
Okay.
And this is actually a beginner pattern. And
That's for beginners?
Yes.
Oh my gosh.
let me tell you why, because again, my quilts, I'm really focused on kind of creating something that's a little artistic, realistic, and all I have to know are the values between the different, in a color set. So green, for instance, you can see that I've used the dark green on the bottom, the
Right.
mid-tone greens in the middle of it, and then the lighter green on top. And it's really, those pieces are placed very haphazardly, other than, in those value sets. So it's a very easy quilt to execute.
Well, and I love the vase that it's in. It reminds me of the Deutsch
Right.
Deftblau
Yes.
type
yeah.
pottery.
And how simple is this? I mean, it's blue and white fabric, and our eyes were familiar with that sort of pot, and so
Right.
our eyes will fill in the details for the rest of the story. So it's a very simplistic pot, but our eyes will make up the
That's
the
really
difference.
cool. All right, so let's talk about going from artist to quilter. 20 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
you had a little vision of a quilt somewhere. Tell us about
I
this.
did. So I was in Pennsylvania with my mom, and we had gone into an art shop. An antique shop. We were seeing all the historic areas of Pennsylvania, and we walked into this antique shop, and on the wall was hanging this ratty old quilt. And at the time, I remember thinking, "What is that ugly quilt doing on the wall?" So I asked the curator or the shop owner about this quilt, and she proceeded to explain that this quilt was made during the Civil War. And it got my brain thinking, and I realized all of a sudden, and I actually started to cry in the shop. I was so embarrassed, but it just struck me that
Right.
this quilt represents the story of some obscure woman's life
Right.
during
And
such
it didn't happen in just a couple of
That's
days. It was a
right.
real journey.
Yeah.
So then your journey then goes 12 years ago, you walked into your first quilt shop, really, during kind of in this
Yeah.
revival era. Tell us about this.
Yeah, so I was kind of at that phase of my life again where I'd had my children, and my youngest was 2 years old. I was pushing him in the stroller, and I was kind of like, who am I? What am I going to do with what's my next step? And I happened to push him into a quilt shop, and I saw the fabric, and it was like lightning bolts, and I had an epiphany that I wanted to design fabric.
I hear the choirs and the angels
Yeah.
and the lights and all of that, and I'm going to design
Well, so
fabric.
did I.
I'm going to walk into a quilt shop and I'm going to design fabric. Well, let's talk about the next quilt, because
Okay.
designing fabric relates to all the stuff we're looking at. I love this with the squirrel.
Oh, thank you. So this was my most recent quilt, and this is really paying homage to my lifestyle and where I live. So I live in Salt Lake City, Utah, which reminds me I have a gift for you.
Oh, really?
Yes,
Uh-oh.
from Utah.
Uh-oh. These are oh my gosh, a snow globe.
It's a snow globe because I live at the base of the snowy mountains.
Indeed you do. That is awesome. I love snow globes, by the way.
Okay, good. Well,
Yeah.
I was thinking of you.
I have a chapter in my new book titled Snow Globe. That's the
fun.
title of it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, so yay, take me by surprise. All right, let's look at your horse. Purple
Okay.
horse of a different color.
Yeah, so with this one, I wanted to create something. I wanted to challenge myself and not use traditional colors that we think of with a horse. And I chose a horse because I love horses. I love riding horses near my beautiful mountains. I get to ride in the trails system there. And anyway, this was an artistic challenge to see if I can create something that looks realistic using colors that are not realistic. And I think it turned out really. I'm very happy with it.
It is. It's wonderful, and I love how you use your values and your light and all of that in these quilts. You know, we talked about you wanted to design fabric. You did design fabric. And I have no doubt that you will continue to design fabric.
I would like to.
But your passion right now is only 2 years old of this collage quilting technique.
Right.
And you've got a book about it. And oh, there's the bell. It must be time for college.
Collage.
No, it's time for collage, everyone. And we're going to do that with Emily right after the break. I'm excited. Thank you, Emily.
Thank
That's
you.
great.
I'm
Yeah.
excited.
On the next Quilt Show,
Put your seatbelt on.
all right,
My kids will kill us if they see us without it.
people would think we're married.
Buckle up, everyone, for a ride through time.
This is a first for me, Eleanor, a buggy ride.
A buggy ride. This is so cozy, Alex. I like this.
We've traveled far and wide these past 13 years to showcase true legends of the quilt world.
I've never been a legend before, except in my own mind, of course, so that's great.
These are the people who have innovated, took risks, and left indelible marks on the quilting industry we all enjoy today. See the quilts.
Wow. All right, now this is what I know, Yvonne Porcella.
The exercise was to use black and white and the trashiest fabrics I could find.
Experience the unforgettable moments.
Hello.
Welcome in, for heaven's sake.
We're here for the twins.
We are.
May we come inside?
Yes, absolutely.
And learn from the masters. It's our master class on the best in class, our TQS Legends, right here on thequiltshow.com.
Welcome back to the Quilt Show. We're with Emily Taylor today, and Emily, you're going to share with us this wonderful collage technique that you've got, and you have really made it simple for anyone to do.
I hope so.
Right? And I want to tell everybody, Emily has 2 books. One of them is Collage Quilter. Was this your first one?
Yep.
Right. And so so this might be a good, they should get both of them because they're going to want to know
Yeah,
everything.
but this is definitely the beginner guide.
Oh, so it's good for starters,
Yep.
right? And this is your newest book. And what's the name of this one?
Take Flight.
Okay. And we're going to share some things in this segment that are really coming from this second book, right?
Correct.
All right, very good. So where do we start? I mean, if someone was to start with one of your patterns, which is, we're going to use this raven.
Right.
But it really kind of does start with the fabric.
It
right?
does. Everything revolves around the fabric, right? So the very first thing that we do is, well, we're going to gather our supplies. So if we want to show, all we need is scissors, some pins.
All right, I'll just put them all over here. So we've got scissors, pins, parchment paper,
Yep.
and a fusible. You like Steam-A-Seam 2 Light.
I like light Steam-A-Seam 2, and it works really well with this method. Now, so that's what you need, easy peasy, right?
Right.
But now let's get into the nitty gritty, which is about the fabric.
Okay.
So the pattern that we're working on from the book is this raven, and it has 4 different values. So can you point the values
All right.
out?
So should I go from dark to light?
Yep, so
All
we're
right.
going to separate, yep.
So the darkest is going to be this black, and then I'm going to guess this kind of gray.
Yep,
There's a lighter gray on the head, and maybe here
yep.
or here. Here.
We've got 4 right
Okay,
here.
and then here's the 4th, which is the
Yep.
really light version. So you specifically created this pattern with only 4 values.
The fewer number of values that we have, the easier this is going to be. So working with 3 values is a piece of cake. 4 values, it's really very doable. So now that I've identified that it has 4 values, I'm going to make 4 value sets with my fabric.
Okay.
So I want you to help me with that.
Okay, I'm willing to
Okay.
do that. And this is pre-fused now, so it's
Correct.
kind of ready to go. It's just
Yep.
a jumble of fabric.
Yeah, so all
Huh.
I'm going to do is just start separating it, but I want you to do it.
Okay, well you're going to help me for
I'm
sure.
gonna help you.
All right, so if my number 1 is the darkest, I'm just going to go to the darkest. I think those are dark.
Yep.
And I'm going to stick with darks for a second. Am I doing okay?
Yeah, these are great. This is exactly what I would do.
All right, so those are my darkest, but I want to kind of step up a notch. I don't know. This one for sure
Number 2, yep.
would be a number 2. And then I look at this, which has darks, but I feel like it needs to come over here.
I agree. I think it goes over here.
All right, thank you. I'm on the right track. I would put
Yep.
this here, because if I put it over there,
It
it
stands out a little
stands
bit.
out. It jumps out at me a little bit. Maybe here.
And that's kind of the criteria. You want to be able to create a set where not one piece of fabric stands out too much. You
right.
want them to kind of meld together. Good. Yeah,
See, I think this stands out too much, so I'm going to put it back there.
I agree.
I don't know where these are going to go yet.
Yeah, I think those go over there. I think that's
Okay,
good.
maybe here. Definitely there. All right, I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I think we're getting in the ballpark. I'm going to put those dark ones there, and it gets easier when you have less fabrics.
That's right.
So I'm going to say
Yes.
I kind of
there
want
we
to. I
go.
kind of want to put this one here.
Okay, good. That's great because guess what? It really doesn't matter if we move it back and forth just a little bit.
Like this one could go there or it could go here.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
Happens. All right, so we've got our values 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I was surprised to learn this. Everyone, as you look at this pattern, I was surprised that you don't cut this out as a pattern from a piece of fabric.
Right.
That's
I
what
don't.
collage is all about.
Yeah. So all I'm going to do, I'm going to demonstrate this right
Okay.
now, is I will start with my pattern underneath here.
All right.
Then I take my parchment paper.
Now you're working on like a foam core with
Yeah.
batting?
So I've got a piece of 1/4-inch foam core and then I've covered it with felt. And the felt helps protect the foam core from the heat because I'm going to use my iron a little bit. And the foam core allows me to pin things in place. So I can pin this and I can pin fabric pieces to my foam core. So now you can kind of see that I've gotten started with this section that I've identified as 1. So we're going to just continue here and watch how easy this is. It's
Yeah,
just
and I'm going to pull this over because what you're talking about is this entire dark section. You're just going to cut out random pieces of fabric.
Yeah.
You're not cutting out a pattern piece.
correct. So I generally, the easiest, quickest, most efficient cut is just a triangle just because I'm just cutting it right off of there. My sizes, so I'll cut a triangle and then I'll sometimes round the edge of it because a rounded edge will seem to fit into a pattern better, or if it needs to be the other way, I can just make it fit. So the idea is I'm just making pieces fit in this section and I'm just going to overlap them. So I take a pin.
Yeah, so hold that down so we can get that on camera.
Okay.
Because this is a cool technique. I hold it, yeah. So let's do it again. Because
Okay.
I think there. So you're scratching on the back side.
Yep, and then that just allows me to peel the paper side off of the steam a seam, and then sometimes it will pull a little thread, so make sure that you trim off any extra little threads. But you can see it sticking to my finger.
Yeah.
That's the temporary adhesive. And then I'm just going to overlap the piece that's next to it.
All right.
And now listen, here's the kind of weird thing. It will stick to my fingers and it will stick to other pieces of fabric, but sometimes it doesn't stick to the parchment paper very well, and that's why I have my iron here.
So
Because-
if you heat it a little bit, it'll stay to the
Yep.
parchment paper?
Yep, it will activate that glue, melt it just enough so that it will stick to the parchment paper. So now
Okay.
it's going to stay in place. And I'll just continue working like that.
So you did hard edges, which I saw straight edges, triangles, and you curved them out a little bit. But do you ever make wiggly little amoeba-like shapes or whatever?
Yeah, it really depends on what I'm working on. So if I'm working on something that's a leaf, for
Can
instance.
I cut one out while you're doing that? And you can put that
Absolutely.
one down. So as you're working on a leaf?
If I'm doing something that's organic, like a leaf or a flower, and I want it to be just a little more delicate, I will soften the edges up a little bit. Okay, do you want to put
Well,
that where
I
you
want to
think
ask a question. I'm looking at the bottom of this here, and it's kind of scalloped.
Yep.
Would I then scallop this?
It's not necessary, but you sure can.
Okay.
I don't know that I would worry about it. I'm pretty haphazard. I try to keep it pretty loose. I don't want to become restricted by lines. So everything on here is really just a suggestion.
Okay. And I would say what I'm seeing is that it's not 100% permanent at this stage. You could kind of move something or change it if you needed to.
As long as I haven't adhered it to the other pieces of fabric around it. Because once I put the iron on a piece of fabric that's overlapping another piece of fabric, then they're
You're
pretty
making a
stuck.
commitment at that point. Okay.
Yeah, so what I'll do is just continue working here.
Well, what I love about this is that you're not really having to trace a shape or cut out something exactly.
That's right.
You still want them to overlap so that you can, first of all, so you don't have any holes in your quilt.
Right?
But you could also, if you really felt like you needed to add something, you would be willing to just put it over the top of something that's already there.
Yep.
Is that true?
Yep. And I might end up with a few little holes, so watch how easy this is to fill. It's kind of a triangular shape. I'm going to cut a little bit of a larger triangle and cover that
And then
spot.
just cover it up.
Yep.
All right, so now
So-
you've got one that's a little further along. Let's take a look at that.
Yep. So this one is just a little bit further along. I've covered up all of the darker section there. And now I can just begin. Let's take a look at this one.
Okay.
So I see this is my lighter section right here. So
Right.
let's start filling in some
Okay,
light.
so let's go with
Yeah, you pick it.
No, I was going to go with this one because it kind of had a lot of texture on it. Is
Okay.
it too small?
No.
All right.
So I.
Oh yeah,
you know,
because
I'm
we're not
gonna-
having to cut the one piece out.
Yeah,
That's,
I don't have to do that. Now, the one time when I might want to do that is if I want to get the appropriate placement for his eye.
Okay.
And then I might want to peel back the parchment paper and trace it. And I don't.
Oh,
I
that's a
could-
good tip.
I could trace that if I want to, but the rest of it, no. I'm just going to make it fit.
That is a really good tip. Wow.
So here's maybe some feather-looking shapes right there.
All right.
See that? I'm going to score it.
I love that scoring method. I learned that years ago because when you dig into the side of a fusible piece, you're really distorting the edges of your fabric.
I know,
So
when
that scoring
pulling the
piece is
threads,
really, really
yeah.
great.
So let's pick another piece that's in the same value set. Maybe something like this. Now that's kind of a ski-wampus
It is,
shape.
yeah, it really is, but you could use some of those pieces just by rounding them a little bit, right?
Yeah. So all of a sudden, like I just kind of trimmed it off a little bit, and I think I'll just kind of make it fit right there.
That's great. And all of these little bits that we're dealing with, you end up having to like twice a day or once a day end up
Sweep.
saying, I'm gonna get rid of all those little pieces.
Yeah, I used to save every single little thing, and now that would make me crazy. So.
All right, so let's look at this finished one that you've got and talk about where you're at this stage when you feel like you've got it completely covered. And by the way, the eye and the beak are the two things here that get me the most excited because that's where you're going to really see look at the monitor.
Yeah.
It just looks great right there.
Yeah.
All right.
So the eye, let me just point out, I did trace the little pieces for the eye. And what I love about this now is I have a complete unit. So I've got a really artistic looking raven that has lots of texture and movement. He's he's got a lot of personality.
Right. And individual, unique.
He's completely unique. There's no way that I could create exactly the same thing that I've already done. Now the next step is I will press the whole little guy here. Do we want to name him?
Yeah, let's call him Ravel.
Ravel.
Ravol. There's a joke. There's not a joke. It's seriously.
You've got something behind that, don't you?
Yeah, I do because there's a raven in my book that I told you about, and his name is Ravel.
Okay, is
So
it
there-
Ravel?
O-L.
O-L.
R-A-V-O-L.
Okay,
Ravel.
Ravel it is.
Yes.
All right, so then we can just peel Ravel off in a single piece. And I'll leave him here for just a minute, but we're going to talk about
how he works in the color and all of that
Yep.
coming up in the next segment. Now, before we leave for the break, because we are going to come back to this after the break and talk about color theory and how you, compositional theory
Right.
and those kinds of things, I want to call everybody's attention to the adoration quilt again, because you also have a collage technique that's not quite this free, and I don't mean that in a bad way, because some people want more guidance. And it's like a
Yes.
paint by number.
exactly.
And your patterns actually come, let's hold this up together and hope that I don't get it upside down, but if we do, we'll
Yeah, it's a little
figure that
tricky.
out.
So this is the, let's see here, right, like this.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is what you use to make this quilt right here, Adoration.
Right, so there they are. And so this is a fabric foundation that really is like paint by number.
Yep.
Put your darks, your mediums, and lights right onto this fabric.
Exactly.
Wow.
So it's very simple. You're sorting your fabric just like we did, picking multiple pieces of fabric for each value.
I think it's great, Emily, because so many times I've made quilts and people go, do you have a pattern for that? And I'm just looking at like, it would be impossible. Well, you've made something not impossible by providing something like this.
Yeah, well, that's the idea. I want people to have success with my patterns and to enjoy the process as much as I have. It's for me too. I mean, it makes it really simple for me. If I dumb down the pattern and just separate it into values, then it becomes very simple.
That's great.
Yeah. So,
Well, and you make it magical, just like this snow globe. And talk about magic. We're going to have some big magic when we come back after the break on color and composition. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the Quilt Show, everyone. We're spending our day with Emily Taylor, all the way from Salt Lake City, Utah, right?
yes.
And in this segment, you're going to give us some of the nitty-gritty nuts and bolts of not just color theory, but honestly, how to use fabric as color. When I think of an artist with a paint and they have to mix all the colors, I know that's I know there's a thing to that, right? But artists in the quilting world, for the most part, we're using the fabrics that are provided to us. We go
Yep.
to the stores, and instead of mixing our colors with paint, we just have to pull the bolts off the shelves
Right.
and make that work. And so I think for quilters, personally, color can be daunting.
I agree.
Seriously. They go to and there's a begging the quilt shop owner to give them some assistance. And
Yep.
quite frankly, the quilt shop owner's probably not any more schooled in art and color than the person that's walking in.
Right.
So what you're sharing today is really good information on color, and I'm really excited to share it. So tell us where to
Great.
begin.
Okay, so we have, we've just finished Ravel, the Raven, and I thought this would be a really good point to share sort of my secret sauce. And the secret sauce with collage quilts is using contrast, creating contrast. And there are 3 ways to create contrast. And that contrast can also be subtle or it can be dramatic.
Okay.
So I'm going to give you a...
And neither one of them's right or wrong.
No,
if
they're
you
both-
want subtle contrast, there's tips.
Right.
And if you want big contrast, there's tips,
Right,
right?
right.
So what do you want right now? What are you going for?
Well, I'm going to show you something.
Okay.
I'm going to peel this Ravel off of his parchment paper, and I'm going to lay him down right here. And I want you to tell me, do you think that's dramatic contrast or subtle
Well,
contrast?
to me, I think it's extremely dramatic.
Right.
And not only does it look dramatic on the table, when I look into the monitor and I see Ravel
Mm-hmm.
on that fiery orange background, and then maybe a quilter would say, well, why does it look dramatic? And
Okay, let's
what's
talk
the answer?
about that. Right. So there are 3 ways to create contrast, and what we're dealing with right here is color contrast. So we're familiar with the color wheel, and this is a great example of using complementary colors or opposite colors because they are opposite the color wheel. So we've got orange in the background and blue from Ravel in the foreground. So that color combination is very dramatic. And I want to show you now an example of.
Okay, I'm just asking a question.
Yeah, sure.
Would it be safe to say that if somebody's looking for a high color contrast, that the way to go is to go opposites on the color wheel? So whether it's orange and blue or green and violet,
Right.
would that be the way to go?
Absolutely. So those complementary colors are always going to be the highest contrast that you can create. Dramatic, beautiful. That's why pink and green and red and green look so good together, because they complement each other. That's
Sure.
why they're called complementary colors.
Okay.
Okay, so an example of a more subtle contrast would be if we use analogous colors. So
Analogous, that's a big word.
analogous colors are those colors that are next to each other on the color wheel. So we can see the analogous colors that we're using in this composition are the blues and the purples and the greens.
Right.
And it's a really beautiful but much more subtle contrast, right?
Right. And why do we still see him setting up here?
Why do we do
Yeah, why do we still see him if it's all blended?
Right. Well, I think that's because now we're going into a value contrast. So we see the value back here is really light, and that's a contrast to the dark value of the bird. He's a very dark, heavy creature. So that contrast is what allows us to still see him so that he doesn't blend entirely into the background.
Sure. And I'm looking at this going, and because his bottom tail blends into the darkest piece, if you look at this, it's like his tail's kind of gone.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at even his claws or his talons on top of this. They're also a little bit disappeared because everything got too much the same.
Yeah.
So I'm just asking, would you leave it like this? Or would you want to kind of pull him up a little bit for that to be shown a little
Well,
bit more?
I'll show you what I decided to do. So
Okay.
I've created another quilt block.
All right.
And this one, well, I still love the analogous look. I like that kind of a little bit more moody look that is created when he's on a block that is analogous. And then I've also created, so to demonstrate a few more examples of making, creating contrast and dramatic contrast versus subtle contrast, I've made these others, and we're going to take a look and talk about them some more. Okay.
So do you need a background?
Yeah,
or?
let's put the quail. What did we decide the name is? Queenie?
Queenie.
Queenie
Yeah,
the
we're naming
quail.
everybody today.
Okay, so I'm going to peel Queenie the quail. And I actually want to put Queenie the quail on that one over there.
Okay, all right.
Let's put that over there. Because I want this, there we go, okay. Now Queenie the quail she's got a lot of drama in her little body because she's got a lot of that value contrast. You can see lots of the dark and then contrasted with lots of the light. She also
And
has
mediums too. It's just everywhere.
Yeah, so she's kind of a mix of all kinds of contrast, right? And I want to talk to you about, so we've kind of looked at value contrast, we've looked at color contrast.
Right.
The next contrast that I want to focus on is temperature contrast, because this is one that I really, really love. I love to play with temperature.
And I'm just going to put this chart back down. Is this your chart?
Yeah, this chart is in my new book,
Okay.
and this is kind of this is what I go to remind myself that these are the methods that I use to create contrast.
Okay. And value, of course, is the lights and darks.
Yep.
And we're going to talk now about the
Temperature.
temperature. Okay.
Yeah, so actually a good way to do it is let's take a look at the fabric here.
All right.
I love the idea that we understand that there is a warm section of the temperature of the color wheel and a cool section, right? Warm and cool. We know that, right?
Well, I do, but I want to make sure that everybody does. So those fiery colors, the yellows and the
Like
oranges
this?
and the reds, those are very, very hot.
Yep.
Okay, very warm.
Yeah.
And then the watery, grassy blues and purples and greens are what we call cool.
Right.
But within every color,
That's the key.
Yeah.
Within every color is warm and cool representations, and this is what I love.
I'm going to go back to this so that you can tell them that. So show them
Okay.
on this color wheel what you mean by that.
With warm and cool?
Yes.
Okay, so if we're going to look at green, all right, so here's green right here. As I move towards the blue end of the spectrum around here, my greens are going to become cooler because they are towards the cool end of the spectrum.
Right.
As my greens go towards this warm end of the spectrum, they become muddy because they're heading over here, and they're warmer greens.
Right, and if we were to just block out these 3 swatches, we could call all of those green.
Yeah.
But one of them is going to be a cooler green,
Right.
and one of them is going to be a warmer green, and that's
Exactly.
going to create some contrast
Yes.
within one color.
Yeah, so let's look at this pile of curated fabric. So I've curated this fabric bundle so that it has value differences from dark to light, but it also has temperature differences. So I want to see, can you help me pull out?
Well, I will do my best, but I'm going to let you get started. What do you
Okay.
want to pull first?
So let's just separate between warm and cool, okay?
Okay.
And the best way to do this is just to compare. So would you say that's generally warm or cool?
Honestly, I think that this is going towards blue.
I
It's
do
becoming
too.
teal, so I would put this
Yeah.
on the cooler side.
Right, right.
But that one is
And then-
going way warm.
Right,
That one's
so-
going over to the yellow side.
Right, and all you have to do is compare 2 pieces to be able to determine that.
Right.
Right, so
okay.
that's very yellow.
This is a dark one. I think it's dark, but it feels more yellow to me than it feels
Right.
blue. Is that?
Absolutely. And let me tell you something else too that's interesting, especially for green. As we're moving towards the warm end of the spectrum, we're also moving towards the opposite color. So
Oh,
that
yes, yeah, yeah.
becomes more muddy, right?
Okay,
It's
yep.
less true.
Right.
This, for instance,
Oh, I think that's blue.
Yep.
That's a bluey
very
green.
blue. This
I
one,
same over here.
Yep.
Even though he's darker, he still feels more blue to me than he feels like this guy.
That's
is
right.
Way back over here.
yes.
All right.
Excellent.
So this task would be something for people to play with in their own fabric stashes. I mean, goodness, you could just go get your fabric stash and
Yeah.
do this as an exercise.
Absolutely. And let me tell you why this is kind of fun. It's super fun to juxtapose a warm and a cool green right next to each other because,
Show us in that leaf.
okay,
Because why?
because, well, let's think about the effect that warm colors have. Warm colors do what? They come forward.
Yeah.
What do cool colors do? They
kinda-
recede.
Yeah, they kind of get lost. They
Yep.
kind of go backwards.
Yeah, they recede. So when you put a warm and a cool green or a warm and a cool purple next to each other, the effect is to create a little bit of movement. So that becomes a very subtle contrast.
This is a great example.
Yeah.
This was such a wonderful thing to see as we were rehearsing this segment, to see that you have used both your cooler greens
Yep.
and your warmer greens to create the excitement in this collage.
Right,
Okay.
right. So this is like the gist of collage for me. I absolutely love this.
And I almost embarrassed myself because I says, well, there went something.
you nailed it.
Something went horribly wrong right here because there's a lot of fabric in this piece, but you might as well have just used this one because
Right.
there's no contrast there. It's all
Exactly.
the same kind of green.
Oh, you nailed it. I mean, that is just such a perfect example of why you want to use multiple temperatures of the same color.
That's great.
That's boring. This is boring. This is exciting.
So how do we now make a composition with all these elements?
Okay, so now's the fun part, and this is why I like the parchment pressing method, because I can create each element individually, and then I get to play with the composition. So you've kind of seen, I think for this quilt, I'm going to be using analogous colors, and then I want to add some interest to my little.
Are we going to him?
Yep, I think
All right,
we'll
let's
put
pull him closer to us a little bit.
We'll put him down here, kind of like he's hiding in the brush. And I've got a few more pieces that we might play with, but this is where it really becomes playtime. And I want you to look at
And
this
there's
too.
no right or wrong to this.
Nope.
Okay, so
But this is kind of interesting. This has a good combination, again, of warm and cool and value contrast, right? So you see that really dark contrasted against these lighter pieces up here. So it gives it a little bit of a definition.
let's put it on the composition, see what it looks like.
Okay.
I suppose it's like anything, you can go overboard or you can not have enough, so you got to find just the right
Absolutely.
amount.
Yep, and we can just keep moving things around until we get the composition just the way we want it.
And that's a freeing thing, because it's just, one of my good friends, Lorraine Torrance in the quilting industry, said, make visual decisions visually.
Oh,
You know,
yeah.
I love that. So
Yeah.
that you can move it around, decide what you like. Oh, look at that. Look, that looks
Yeah,
great.
isn't that kind
now,
of fun?
we pulled other things out to see what they might look like, but I think that's
kind of what I like.
looks pretty
yeah.
good. So I don't know if Sparky the Sparrow, is he going to make an
Let's see.
appearance?
Yeah, let's put him right here and see what he looks like.
But this is now, look at that blue against the
Oh
yellow.
my gosh, it's beautiful, right?
Yeah, it looks great. So I think that what we've learned today is really valuable lessons with our fabric. And that's one of the few times on the Quilt Show we've been able to really delve into how color really works. And I think it's been valuable, Emily. It's just
good.
wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me here. This was really fun. I appreciate it.
It's been great. And if you liked it, how about giving us a little clap? Because we don't have an audience today. We're doing this source of very skeleton crew and everything, but it's been fun.
It's been so
really
fun.
been fun. And great to get to know you as well.
Same.
Well, everybody, Emily is a great teacher. Yay? I
you.
believe that. And we have a retired teacher coming up who actually takes and curates wonderful special exhibits now, and you're not going to want to miss what the TQS cameras captured. We'll be right back.
THEIRstory is a celebration of the human spirit, and it's a compilation of the 3 exhibits that I've already done. Fly Me to the Moon was to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the moonwalk and all things lunar, so we have all the astronauts, we have all the missions. HERstory is an exhibit that celebrates strong women. It's in honor of the 100th anniversary of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. It had to be since 1920, and it had to be a woman who had a groundbreaking accomplishment. OURstory came about right after the 2016 election. This is a positive exhibit celebrating human rights heroes, human rights events like the marches of the suffragettes and the marches of the women in Washington, and we ended up with a really rich collection celebrating the fact that we all have rights. THEIRstory is a combination of all 3 exhibits. I call it a celebration of the human spirit. It's a fun look back at our history and who has done things that no one else has done and who has lifted us up. People have loved it. One woman last night was in tears. She was so touched by the celebration of the human spirit, by the accomplishments of the people represented here, by the stories that were shared. It's really touched a lot of people, and people were very excited to see it. So this is by Deb Berkebile, and if you look closely, you can see here's Neil Armstrong coming down the lander to put his first footstep on the moon, a day that we all remember with great excitement, and everybody that was alive then can tell you where they were. So this is about Mary Coulter, who is the builder in the desert, and it was made by Karen G. Fisher. I'm always amazed when I look at this quilt by the tiny pieces. This quilt, for people that aren't here, is only 24 by 30. So the pieces that are so tiny are just an amazing accomplishment. Mary Coulter is up here in a ghostly fashion, surrounded by buildings that she designed that look like they could have been made out of parts of the Grand Canyon and the locations where they sit. My first career as a teacher has been very influential in the way I write my books. I have a book on each collection, and it's been my joy to share everybody's art and their stories and their methods and all of that, but I always dig deeper and I put history behind it because I just have to. I'm a teacher and I just can't not give you the background. This is my quilt called Suffrage Long Denied, and it's about my grandmother. She was born in the South Dakota Territory in 1888. And when South Dakota became a state and they got the right to vote, but of course she was a woman, so she did not. She became a salesperson for Singer sewing machines and went door to door and found herself in West Virginia. When she moved to West Virginia, she met and married my grandfather, who was from England, and she lost her American citizenship and became a British subject for a year. And she was not happy. So they moved to Washington, D.C., which didn't have the right to vote until 1964. By then, my grandfather had died, and my grandmother decided she was going to move to Maryland. But it was too close to the election that she had moved in, and she didn't meet the residency requirement. So the first election my grandmother ever voted in was when she was 84 years old, and I was 19, and it was my first election. And it's on a deconstructed grandmother's flower garden, just in memory of her. This is The Apollo Wives by Bonnie Askowitz, and it's about the wives of the Apollo astronauts. And I love this piece because many of their marriages suffered as a result of the celebrity that the astronauts were experiencing, and the fact that they had to be away from home a lot and were often in tempting situations, shall we say. And Bonnie has their pearl necklace here, and it's being just destroyed by the rocket. And here are the wives down here. They had to be proud, thrilled, and happy, but they had to stay in the background. Bonnie has also quilted all of their names into the quilt. I got to sit in the flight director's chair at NASA when I was working on Fly Me to the Moon, and the Fly Me to the Moon quilts have hung at NASA. And I got to hold the chalice that went to the moon in my hand. And a lot of people don't even know that Buzz Aldrin took communion on the moon, but he did. And I got to hold that in my hand. So there's been a lot of really exciting experiences I never would have had without being a curator of these exhibits. This one is called Mary McLeod Bethune, Educator and Activist. It's by Betty Hahn. And Betty is an amazing painter. Betty just does them kind of freehand, looking at a picture. Mary McLeod Bethune was an educator, and she actually was an advisor to President Roosevelt. She advised 4 presidents, actually. I do feel like I'm putting good out into the world, but I don't always realize the good that has come of it until an artist comes up and talks to me at an exhibit and says, "Oh, I want you to know, making this quilt changed my process, changed my way of looking at my art," and it's always very rewarding to hear those stories. This is called, and it's by Ricky Selva. Ricky Selva's husband just retired as the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and Ricky was in the first class of females that were at the Air Force Academy. And so she made this quilt about females being allowed to serve in the military. And if I can find her tag, I love it because she used a dog tag on the back for the name of the quilt. If you'd like more information on the exhibit, or if you'd like to order the books, please go to www.SuzanneMJones.com.
How lucky we are to get the TQS cameras into that exhibit, and my hat is off to Suzanne, because Suzanne, I know that takes a tremendous amount of work, and not only for the exhibit, but for all of the exhibits that you've done and the books that have gone with them. I mean, these are beautiful, thick, rich coffee table books. If you don't have this in your collection, I suggest that you put it in your quilting library. Also want to thank Emily Taylor today for a wonderful experience with her collage quilts. And goodness gracious, the information we got on color theory today was over the top. I hope you're having a good time, everyone, with the Quilt Show. We certainly love you and thank you for all your support. And I'm going to end by saying, as I always do, it's a new day every day.